what I'm going to try to propose to everybody today is really the architecture of innovation. And it's really in a development. I don't see it as processes and external barriers. I look at it, everything comes from within. You've got to do it. And hence, the biggest barrier to innovation is never, in my view, lack of resource or ideas. It's the version of yourself entangled in these systems and structures you find yourself in. So what I've done is I've taken time out to try to think about what sort of drives this, right? And this idea about what I term sovereignty. Sovereignty isn't, anointing Dave as king and giving him a scepter and saying, hey, Dave, come on. You are, you're running it, right? Sovereignty is about authorship. Sovereignty is about authoring what you do, understanding the value proposition you want to develop, and building the system and structure to do it. It really comes down to that. But for scientists, for engineers, other entrepreneurs, business folks in the audience, there's a process to it. You just don't get there. You have to go through a systematic process. And I saw some of that really with how Dave articulated a lot of this. So this is my proposed structure, right? This is what I think happens when we start our journeys, right? So this idea about system architecture, it's really how you start to understand the constraints of the system you work in. And for Dave, it was AEA technologies. He saw how powder technology could be used in inhaled technologies. And for me, it was working with the likes of GSK and Profile Therapeutics, understanding their constraints. I mean, those companies had to pivot God knows how many times in order to have products that they took into market. But what they did was, at that point, you just understand the problem. What you don't know is mechanistically, how does it actually work in order for you to control it? So the elevation of that is this explanatory mastery. You need to actually understand the mechanism, particularly for this industry. It's so complex. Without that mechanistic understanding, you're dead, right? There's no products, there's no services. You can't really bring these products to fruition. And once you have that level of understanding and you've built those mechanistic capabilities, you can start to author and self-author. That means set your companies up or work within your organization to drive that innovation right from bottom up, not top down. So you come from the bottom at these things and take it to the top. And then what you find is that you get into this idea of autonomous innovation. So you don't start to iteratively just keep changing the same thing one step at a time. You look at, if something's not working, you look at new paradigms. And I'll talk to you a little bit about some examples from my career right now that I'm going through where we've had to do this, right? And sovereignty is when you come to the point where you now are doing innovation by design. The system is doing it. You're not waking up one morning thinking, well, I'm going to be innovative today. You're just doing it. So for me, it started with working with Rob Price. So Rob, he's eminently innovative. And that's not a light bulb over his head. That's a mushroom pretending to be a light bulb. So I wanted to work with Rob for one simple reason, because he was doing causal research. He was trying to understand, you put A in, you get X out, what happens in the middle? And actually through a Victoria-funded PhD, Dave Morton was supervisor on that PhD. He came up with the cohesive adhesive balance approach to colloid probe AFM. Now, there's a whole history here. We could spend probably 2 sessions on this. But the important thing was that it allowed us to look at the process-induced changes to active pharmaceutical ingredients. So the glycopyrroniums, why are they problematic? And this is already conceived by the time I came to Rob. It's all done. By 2005, all of this stuff was published. And my postdoc was all funded by Novartis, and they said, look, here's AD237 and everything else that came with it. Go and screen it out. And what we found was that we could actually fingerprint how the API was processed in terms of how it was functional in the product. The following day, they said, look, just you carry on doing your postdoc, and I worked with people like James Tibbetts on CFD. I started looking at other things, but they wanted me to do all of that screening in a company. We want to have it in real time. And that's where Nanopharm was basically seeded from, right? And eventually we started to publish this, and we essentially became International Drug Rescue, right? So you're going in, you're fixing the problems, and that helped us to then say, okay, we understand the mechanism. We're now nucleating that into a business idea. So when we set up Nanofarm, the idea was we never wanted to go into the venture capital area. We didn't want to make products. We didn't want to take the company in that direction. So what we essentially set Nanofarm to do was to become a tool maker. Let other people solve their innovator's dilemma, right? People want to disrupt the market. Let's help them, right? And when we came in, we started to go beyond just looking at surfaces and process. We started to understand structure. We started to understand how dissolution could be employed in this space. And then the generics kicked in. And the generics had a massive target in order to get into this space. Now, we were helped because we got involved with the FDA at the same sort of time. And this is a quote from Beth Allen's great website that Leinberger, so the head of OGD, said, look, these guys have helped us to really understand how complicated this thing is. And that helped us to really start to nucleate our business, and we grew from 2 people to approximately 40. And at that point, we decided to exit the business, and we were fortunate that went to a great home like Aptar, who've managed to amalgamate it into this ecosystem. But from an innovator's perspective, I believe an artist doesn't make the same picture twice. Right, so for my evolution to occur, I had to step away from the things that made Nanofarm successful. And that pushed me into losing part of my identity and thinking more clearly about actually the product aspects of what we're trying to do. So where's the value proposition now? So I got involved with Professor Garth Rappaport, Professor Kazita. Garth's a serial entrepreneur. He's behind Ellipta. The guy's done it all. And what we got involved with is understanding about RNA delivery to the nose and lungs. And what we LNP formulation. I think everybody's got a poster on LNPs at this conference. We realize they don't work. Right? They're toxic. Can't get them out. Even if they do get out, you don't know how much you're getting out. And we had to rethink how we actually do this. And we actually used a whole computational nose on a chip, in vitro models to actually come up with a formulation which we've branded NEED. So nano-emulsion enhanced delivery system for RNA. And we've managed to take this into clinic, right? So I've gone from being in a service-led business to actually then applying this directly into a technology and building the value proposition that way. Now, this is autonomous innovation. This is saying, I'm not going to do the same thing as everybody else. I'm going to do it different. And Dave just made a great point, which I want to just touch on. Cost of goods. It's about $500 per dose for an LNP formulation, right? And believe it or not, it doesn't matter how much the back-end cost is or the front-end cost for the product is, no one's going to pay that money. No one wants that product. I can guarantee you that. So you do need to think about cost of goods. You do need to innovate around that problem. And fundamentally, I think progressing on from that. So if you look at what we've had to do, we have to use a bit of computational modeling. We have to use a bit of in vitro. We can't just go straight to animals. You can't even go straight to human, clearly, to build up that proof of concept. And that slows things down. So sovereignty for me is, and this is the company that I've now set up, this Etheralis Bio AI. It's not a CRO. It's not a modeling suite. We don't do any service. What it is, it's a pipeline generation company using AI. AI is amazingly powerful. But rather than messing around on the periphery and doing a bit of modeling, it's actually use it to build the bloody pipeline. Build it from concept. And if Dave mentioned about China, a lot of the companies that you're seeing in China, they're using this, getting a phase 1 done. Next thing you know, the asset is already in a large pharma entity. And fundamentally, I think that's really what I want to leave you with is, innovation is an evolutionary process. It's not a system. It's us as people having to evolve into that system. And I'll stop there.